and I have failed to do so for whatever reason, please just approach me and say, I need an envelope or I need to take this elsewhere, then just let me know and we'll fix that, okay? So, but I do apologize that I'm still getting used to the new offices, and that's one of those little quirks that this is new to me, so there it is. That being said, hopefully the exam was pretty much what you expected. Was it in general what you all expected? In general? Okay. We'll see how the points go. In general, the thumbs level was about around here for the exit poll. I always exit. By the way, just so you are all warned, I always do the exit poll to see how you're doing, and I'm glad it was mostly the thumb and not like the middle finger that was being given. So that was nice, you know. So that's that. But today we're moving onwards. Now that we have finished with Reconstruction, we're facing all sorts of new topics. So let's begin our new section. And today's new section is entirely something entertaining, at least in my opinion. And we said that what was this big change that happened in the late 19th century? What was this big arc of the story that we're going to be talking about? The process of industrialization. Okay? The Industrial Revolution is huge. And there's no question that, as we said, even though there's a reluctance among some to use the phrase revolution, that what's happening in the late 19th century and the early 20th century is so profoundly changing for American culture. It is mind-boggling. As I said, you know, we have a culture that's mostly agricultural and mostly rural, and is going to, by the early 20th century, become mostly urban. And so, if you look at where the outline is, and if you look at the continuation of the outline, we start off focusing the story of industrialization in sort of a traditional way, which is, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, what do you tend to think of? All the great what? Well, okay, the factories and inventions and technologies, right? So we're going to start off with a scientific lecture and talk about the technologies. But when we talk about the technologies and inventors, as important as it is to know the inventors themselves, what else is important? It's to know, like with our identification questions, it's not just who and what it was, but why it was significant. Why was it important? What did it change in society? What did these inventions do? Not just physically. Okay, yes, they sew clothes, or they thresh cotton, or they do something along those lines. But what effect does it have on society is what makes these inventions important. And I'm trying to select a small sample of things that have had particular societal effects, and in some cases, societal effects that are maybe not ones that you would anticipate, not ones that are easy to track, but I need you to see them. I'm going to start off by giving you some of these, talking about them, and then later on, I'm going to see if you can't intuit what some of them are. I'm going to see if you can't figure them out as we go along in the lecture. But outside of the technology lecture, once we finish with the technology section, then when we come back on Tuesday, we're going to start mapping out how this changes the economy. And because the idea of economics changes dramatically. We were always capitalists, but what happens when capitalism moves away from agrarian capitalism and transforms into industrial capitalism changes the world dramatically. And so there's going to be all sorts of new theories about how capitalism works, because capitalism and distribution of wealth changes dramatically as a result. The idea of how you work and where you work changes. And there's going to be critics of capitalism that say that industrialism broke capitalism. And if that's the case, what are these challenges to capitalism? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about the people who were able to get control of economics in the late 19th century. These robber barons, as they're called. Please. And even as these robber barons are doing so, we look at their methods. What were the methods of these robber barons to take control, get monopolies? What economically were they doing in order to corner the market? But of course, once we talk about things from the lifestyles of the rich and famous and the guys who ran the factories, what should we also look at on the other side? If we look at the owners, we should also probably look at the workers, the labor. And so then we'll flip the story and we'll look at, if we've been going from the top down, we'll then look from the bottom up and look at the story of labor and immigration and what's going on in the labor force and what kinds of things of the nascency of unionization in the late 19th century. Finally, we'll seem to take a hiccup and we're going to ask about what are the demographic changes that occur as a result of this. And there's actually two weird forces, because in the late 19th century, you're seeing the very sort of the continuing of the westward movement, as we continue to move out, we've already settled California, and we've got Texas, and we have everything sort of east of the Mississippi, but that Midwestern area is now going to be filled in the late 19th century, and one of the arguments we're going to talk about is how that movement west is altered by industrialization, how that even westward movement was changed before and after the Civil War, and how industrialization alters that. And then finally, we'll talk about the big theme of the demographic change, which, as we said, people are going to be less in the country, and where are people are moving to? They're all moving to cities, right? And so urbanification. And that's where we're going to end our lecture series for this section. So we have a quite ambitious schedule because we're hopping from discipline to discipline. Economics and political science, social science, demographics. So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover in a relatively short period of time for your next exam. But one thing we're not going to emphasize, whereas the last one, in some ways, we discussed a lot of politics and institutional history, now we're going to look more at social, economic, and technological factors as being what's driving the United States. So that's the overview of this section. Okay, that's where we're headed. And as you continue in your readings, or in some cases start, you know what it is to look for, because the chapters are not organized the same way I'm lecturing. I'm lecturing in a very different way and organizing by some themes. So look for those themes as we go along, and then we'll re-pick up the political themes in the third section of this course. All right, so let's talk about these inventions. When the United States industrialized, of course, it wasn't, as we say, industrial revolution is a fair game term to use, but clearly we weren't the first country to industrialize. Who was that? England. Why did England get the jump on us? The Civil War. We were busy killing the shit out of each other, you know? If we hadn't been so busy killing each other, maybe we would have had time to make new toys. But no, okay, it was more important to kill each other, you know. So that was fun. And in the meantime, English.
Haven't they also been making finished goods for hundreds of years already?
Well, we were making finished goods for hundreds of years already. Well, not hundreds, since we were English too for a period of time. But, I mean, for over 100 years, we've been making finished goods as well. I mean, we've been making cabinets and chairs and desks, you know, guns. Although, actually, interestingly, in the early colonial period, the guns that we were making actually were kind of hobblescotch affairs because we didn't actually milder them originally in the 18th century. We actually were like, we got Dutch barrels and German stocks and French triggers and then put them all together, and so in a very American medley, you know, it's kind of like, we didn't really invent it, it's like, shit, what are all the pieces? Gun! You know? It's sort of like that you were making something in Fallout 3, you know, tin can, and this, gun, you know, so it's quite funny. But, and if you aren't game players, that reference made no sense. Sorry about that. Okay, anyway, y'all know it. I'm proud. Okay, anyway. But so, from the very beginning of America's history, though, we did have some of these industrial roots. And indeed, we saw a lot of it in the North and the Northeast. Now, if you've taken my 101, we've already talked about the demographic changes of why the North was more trade-oriented and town-oriented, and the South is more agricultural. So for that story, that's a 101 story. But even from the beginning, we began to see the openings of this, and from the beginnings of the nation. If you consider, the Constitution is 1787 when it's written, 1788 when it's ratified, 1789 is our first government. By 1790, two events already give hints at what's going to begin these industrial maneuvers in the United States. First of all, Samuel Slater will open up the first cotton spinning mill in the United States. This is really what we often refer to as our first factory. Now, of course, when we say factories, our mindset is assembly line and big smokestacks and all that. And this is not a factory in the 20th century sort of mindset. But it is one of the first of the professional mills, and it's, of course, in the Northeast, as we're going to see, the concentration of these mills and factories are going to become so as manufacturing is going to concentrate in the Northeast. That same year, we also, the U.S. government, in its first year of operations, opens up the U.S. Patent Office. Now, what is a patent, first of all? What does that mean?
Patent means like that's your secure idea. Like, say if you have an idea about an invention, the government, you have the rights to protect that invention. So you go through the government to protect yourself from anybody making profit off of that.
Okay,